Hey Sopranos fans, welcome to another episode here on Sopranos Street. This will be our first character comparison episode, and we will be kicking this new series off with a comparison between Jackie Jr. and AJ. In this series, we will compare different Sopranos characters, not only with each other, but also with characters from other TV shows and movies, as well as crime figures from real life. So if you have any comparisons you'd like to see, please leave them down in the comments section, and stay tuned until the end since I have the subject of the next episode in this series narrowed down to two choices. I will present them both to you and let you decide, as well as give you a glimpse of the first historical comparison episode. Now, before getting into this episode, I would like to take a moment to thank all of the viewers and subscribers to the channel. As of my recording this, we just crossed the 2,500 subscriber mark, and for something that started out as for fun, I never expected anyone really to watch. So thank you very much, and on to the Jackie Jr. AJ comparison. When comparing the two, it makes sense to start off with their similarities before working our way through their differences and seeing how things such as intellect, genetics, ambition, and even how the seemingly insignificant difference in their age may play a role in terms of the different social environments in which they would have grown up. First, they were both spoiled and coddled. With AJ, we get to see this throughout the series. It is important to note here, however, that Tony did say some ugly things on occasion.
Look what I made that living for. The fuck you doing? You had dinner an hour ago. What the fuck are you doing to yourself?
Tony, leave him alone.
I'm supposed to get a vasectomy when this is my male heir? Look at him.
And that's not to be overlooked, but for the most part, AJ is still both. He is constantly given things such as gifts or job connections for which he has no appreciation. He gets away with behavior that a lot of parents wouldn't tolerate, and even Tony acknowledged that his school coddled him. Tony even went so far as to come up with a solution.
I'll tell you one thing, though. I'm not going to make the same mistake with AJ. Got expelled. Him was sitting in a military school.
And it's not going to be our military either.
Now, while that may have worked, it didn't happen, so AJ remains spoiled and coddled. Now, with Jackie Jr., we don't actually get to see much of his childhood. We only hear about it through others and see it in glimpses. Ralphie backs up what the viewers can imagine about Jackie's childhood.
Jack spoiled him.
And a flashback.
Jackie Jr., how you doing, huh? You look great. Hey, Jackie, tell him what you told me in the car on the way over here. Come on, capital of Canada. Come on, Dad. The kid's got it up here.
Shows us the degree of coddling that Jackie Jr. received, but we'll get back to that in a bit because it could play into one of the other similarities. Next, both Jackie Jr. and AJ are fairly cold-hearted. With Jackie Jr., this is obvious pretty much from the start, and he makes no pretense otherwise. But AJ largely seems to be viewed differently. Maybe it's because he was so timid when he was younger. Maybe it's because he was such a wuss when he got older. Maybe it's because he showed compassion towards people in third world countries, but so what? His father showed compassion for animals. Does that make him warm-hearted? No, and it doesn't for AJ either. AJ shows us his true colors as soon as he gets the opportunity.
Come on, Millie, it's the shit. Go, help us hold him down. Come on.
Come on. Get off me.
Quit kicking, bitch! Hey, dude, you ever take chemistry? Because Dr. Parisi and me, we're going to do a little experiment.
Yeah, we want to see what happens when you mix sulfuric acid with toe jet.
Fuck no! 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 Don't do it! Fuck!
What? You little bitch? What's the matter?
No! Ah! Ah! Ah!
See that face? He likes this. AJ shows himself to be a perfect example as to why you should never confuse doesn't with wouldn't. Just because AJ doesn't harm people often doesn't mean he wouldn't if given the opportunity. He likes this. He's just too timid to do it on his own. Also, neither Jackie Jr. nor AJ are very bright. Again, with Jackie Jr., this is obvious to most people except him. Perhaps this is due to the coddling he received. For those of you viewers who are too young to remember a world before Google, even back then, that was an elementary school level question his father asked him. Now, AJ is not particularly bright either, although he does read and is influenced by literature, whereas you can't say the same thing about Jackie Jr.
Gotta read. You ignorant fuck.
Now, Jackie Jr.'s stint at Rutgers aside, AJ also has a level of awareness that Jackie Jr. doesn't, which will come into play later regarding their differences. Lastly, and most obviously, they were both sons of New Jersey mob bosses, although they both handled it quite differently. Now, how did these two individuals, growing up around the same time with similar family influences, abilities, and proclivities, end up so different? How did Jackie Jr. end up so naively courageous while AJ ended up so comically weak? Well, first let's take a look at the time frames they grew up in and how, even though they were so close, the social environment would have been completely different. AJ would have come up during the beginnings of what would become the anti-bullying movement, and though it was nowhere near what it is now, there was a growing general awareness of the potential effects of bullying and a sympathy towards them. On the other hand, Jackie Jr., for better or worse, depending on your opinion, would have come out of the 80s tough guy culture. You were expected to be thicker-skinned. Kids teasing each other was just such an accepted part of growing up that they had kids doing it in music videos. Okay, I probably didn't have to put that long of a clip on to make the point, but I mean, come on, how funny is that? Either way, the general attitude wasn't that you should be sad because of a bully, it was that you should go find Mr. Miyagi, get him to teach you some sweet moves, and then go kick the bully's ass. This may have played a part in why Jackie Jr. was so brazen and undeterred by naysayers, while AJ curled up into a ball at any bump in the road, despite the fact that both of them come from what I guess could be considered to be brazen stock. But this completely ignores the level of awareness AJ has that Jackie does not, and that awareness may play a part. The difference in their levels of awareness really starts to come into focus when looking at how each of them handles carrying their father's name. Jackie Jr. views it as a ladder and a shield, while AJ sees it somewhat as a weight. Jackie Jr. uses the April name to try and make his moves in the underworld.
Normally, I would never get involved with a stranger. If Carlo here is vouching for you, I'm willing to make an exception, take care of it.
Thank you.
What did I tell you about my man Jackie?
You know who my father was?
And even thinks he can use it to get away with things.
What if they find out that it's us?
We want them to. Not right away, but, like Ralph said. And even when they do, it's going to get squashed. My old man was Jackie April. The worst will happen, we have to give some of it back.
But right there, he shows his lack of awareness. He overlooked the key word in that whole sentence. Was. His old man was Jackie April. And although technically I guess he still is, he's not around to protect him anymore. AJ's view of the Sopranos name as a weight can first really be seen when he wins his fight by default. When confronted with the fact that this happened because of who his father was and not because of himself, you can really begin to see the insecurities kick in. These insecurities would have been reinforced during his time with Devin Pillsbury, who was clearly enamored with AJ's family name. Another aspect in which their different views of their family names may have played a part is their difference in ambition. Jackie Jr., with his pride in the April name, seems like he would have been similar to a young Henry Hill.
As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster.
Whereas AJ does not. AJ bounces back and forth between goals, never really able to stick with one, and he never seems comfortable in his own skin. So it would be easy to assume at this point that the weight of the Soprano name and the fact that he's not bright but smart enough to know it, combined with his own coddled upbringing, killed AJ's drive, while the prestige of the April name, combined with his stupidity, boosted Jackie's Jr.'s. But if we take a quick glimpse at their fathers, other aspects appear. AJ's lack of ambition may not just be due to all these pressures. He may share his father's trait of looking for the easy way. Now, this is a topic that could be looked into much more closely in a Tony-AJ comparison video, but in keeping it simple for this episode, just like Tony, AJ is seeking the easy path. It's just that AJ had a much easier path presented to him than Tony did. Johnny Boy and Livia never would have tolerated that, and if Tony and Carmela hadn't either, AJ probably would have been far more active. although he probably still would have been depressed, another trait he would have picked up from Tony. Conversely, if Jackie Jr. was ever depressed, we didn't get to see it, and that's not surprising given his father's demeanor. Even while dying from cancer, Jackie Sr. appreciates a good lap dance, and I can't imagine Tony having that same disposition in similar circumstances. Also, in regards to ambition, it may not be entirely due to Jackie Jr.'s lack of awareness. His father pulled a similar stunt which would have been just as dangerous. So evaluating Jackie Jr. and AJ ends up becoming an interesting study in nature versus nurture in The Sopranos, and it's always a mix. Let me know down in the comments section if you think it was more nurture or nature. Now, as promised, I will let you decide the subjects of the next episode in this series, and I have it narrowed down to 2 choices. I won't start on this episode for a couple of days while I finished up the next Machiavellian Monday episode, which is set to release this Monday. After that, I will go check the comment section, and if there's a consensus, I will run with that. First, we have a Tony-AJ comparison episode, and for the other option, we have a Jackie Jr. Janice comparison episode. Both present some interesting possibilities. And lastly, before we go, a peek at the first historical comparison episode, which will be Junior and Old Man Profaci. Now, I'm not saying in any way that Junior is based on Profaci. Rather, Junior made a remark regarding his cunning.
Old man Profaci knew how to split his enemies.
So I will compare the two regarding their strategic prowess. Well, thanks again for watching another episode here on Soprano Street. As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you at the next score.